hello and thank
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, because we don't have a lot of time. First and foremost, thank you all for coming. Right, this is about community, and it's important, these voices at the table, it's important that all voices are represented, especially when it comes to Regent Park. It is so important that you all feel you're getting what you need from this community benefits piece, and that means everybody has to be involved. Chris, it is so good to have you here and your team here. We work together. That's how we roll in Toronto Centre. And I will tell you right now that that is not the case in a lot of other places, and we're blessed to have this kind of relationship where we don't promise, we don't make promises that we can't keep, but we will tell you that we'll work together to make sure that communities come first. And I'm just very thankful for Chris and his team that we can do that 3 levels of government work together in this ride. Okay, so there's that. With regards, and I'm skipping down to the meeting with Minister Hussain, my question would be, have you requested one yet? You have. Have you gotten a response? Has it been a while since you requested one?
Yeah, I think since the fast and the 6th, so Ramadan.
So Ramadan?
Yeah.
I would request again, okay? And I would do a follow-up, all right? If there's a letter, I'm happy to help with that, okay? And point it out as well, but it needs to come from you, okay? So I would poke, is what I'm saying, all right? That's it for me. And I'm just looking forward to talking about all the other things. Oh,
I
no.
just want to interject. We can't help write the letter, just in
No,
case
we can't
there's
write-
a-
no,
help
we
with-
can't.
When we say help with the letter.
Yeah,
just
no,
the
I
specifics,
can't
we
write
can-
it. No.
We can let them know that you.
We're good letter writers.
Yeah.
You are good letter
That's what
writers.
I'm saying. I just want to clarify
Yeah,
in case
and it's a
someone-
good
if there's a
clarification.
misunderstanding.
Yeah, that I won't be writing anything, but that's why I'm saying please
Yeah.
poke again, and that's why I wanted to know when you got in touch last, okay?
No, it's great to be here. Thank you for hosting
Of
us.
course, and we probably need napkins, does anybody want tidbits? Because is there napkins? Sorry to interrupt, Chris, just in case.
Tidbits is the enemy for me.
It is the enemy part.
But the last time I was in here was with Bob Ray, so
Wow.
the office has changed a little bit.
Chris,
since then.
good lord, okay.
I know there's
Wow.
something going on in the basement. I don't know what's going on there. But anyways, it's great to be here. I mean, you mentioned 4 topic items, but I know the first 3 we've talked about before, fair stables, and I'm happy to reinforce that again here. And the 4th item you mentioned, we could discuss that when we get to it.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you, Chris. Thank you, Minister Marcian. I just wanted to bring us back to the first point because this is very, very important. We're in the midst of a housing crisis. We've heard a lot from our neighbors that we need more rent-to income, and we're going to go talk about the definition of affordable housing, which is critical when we talk about who are we building these homes for, right? We can't forget that Regent Park is a social housing community, right? And a lot of people who are newcomers who have been living here for a very long time are looking for a place to call home. And we were very worried about potential displacement, right, when it comes to policy changes, right? So what I'm hoping we could quickly talk about is, has there been discussions between the minister and folks who are responsible for the portfolio, Minister Ahmed Hussain specifically, because we've talked about this in the past. Has there been some discussion on funding for phases 4 and 5 dedicated for rent-geared income units, RGI? So that's the sort of question we have.
These are questions that involve several levels of government, right? You know this. And that's when it comes to who has levers, who can use which levers when. So do conversations happen? Yeah, they happen. But we also know which levers we control, right, with regards to that. So, and that's really important. And that's why it's important that we're all at the table. So I hear you when you say, listen, it isn't just about refurbishing units, it's about more units, right, when it comes to RGI. And that's a really, really important part. Here's what I've seen happen, and this is beyond housing, okay? The federal government will go and procure stuff or provide monies, and that money will go to the province, right? Most of the province and then the city. and we don't necessarily always have strings as to how that money is used. And we saw that front and center in the pandemic, right? So we went out and got the stuff. We got vaccines, we got masks, we got all the things. If you chose to get one, cool. If you didn't, that's your right too. But we went and got the stuff. And then we said, here you go, province, here's all the stuff. Then it was up to the province to disseminate that stuff and the city to figure out how that happened. But that was it. We procured the things, right? So there's certain levers, Willie, that's what I'm saying. So yes, we're part of the conversation, but it's a bigger conversation between three levels. It is.
Yeah, so I just wanna quick, yeah, didn't you wanna say something? Go ahead first.
Yeah, because I was in the consultation for the city consultation around rezoning, but I didn't get my question through.
Oh.
Yeah, and because I wanted to ask if there had been any conversation between Toronto Community Housing and your office around the additional RGI.
So again, RGI is provincially and federally
This is-
funded.
yeah.
We as a city don't have jurisdiction over RGIs. We replace what is there existing. So I've stated this time and time again, I cannot go above and beyond what's already there, because the city does not fund RGI.
So who is it that we need to be talking to?
The province and us.
The province? and-
Yeah. But a lot of the province too. So Kristen would have to be at this table, right? And that's the thing. And this is about, and Chris is right, this is about levers. He can't add additional inventory. That's
No,
not
that's
what,
what's funded. We heard it from the city. It's been very clear
Yeah.
what the jurisdiction is.
yeah,
I think what we're trying to address today is how can we work together to secure that funding from the feds to make sure that it's dedicated to RGI. And I'll explain
see,
what
it's
I
the
mean
make
by,
sure it's
I
dedicated
know the
part.
province
It's
piece,
that
but
part,
I'll,
it's that
I'll
part
bring
there.
up a good example for you.
Okay.
I remember during the pandemic,
Yes,
a lot of stuff was given to the province to give out.
yes,
But nothing prohibited the federal government from reaching out to charities like the Red Cross
yes,
to get stuff out quicker, right?
yes.
To just cut the red tape and just make things more effective, right? So I know the federal government has those tools, right? And CNCH, one of its agencies, for example, can't work with not just the province, but with municipalities on projects to help get housing built faster or fund housing, right?
Yes,
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to remind our friends, because you're our advocate, Marcy. There's
Oh,
no one else who
and
can fight for us.
and
It's
proudly
just you.
so.
I know. So
Proudly
we,
so.
we want you to know that you've got all our support in making the case that from the beginning, phases 1 to phases 3, the federal government has always been a partner.
mm-hmm,
Former Minister, Prime Minister Bill Graham, he worked so hard to make sure that there was huge investments made in Region Park for this to be a success, a revitalization that we can all be proud of, right? So let's figure out how can we make that happen from the federal government, seriously putting the provincial government on standby. Region Park matters. The housing targets that you talked about, the 285,000 new units, you want to get that done, you're going to need our help. But not at the expense of changing the definition of affordable housing to one that's based on market, right? Because they already came up with a benefit to try to meet that gap between
Yeah.
an income-based definition and a market-based definition. We don't want that. We're trying to be very clear in saying that we support the city's definition of affordable housing, OPA 558. And when we hear from senior management of Toronto Community Housing saying, guess what, Waleed? You know the definition of affordable housing? We probably are going to take this federal agency's definition, CMCH's definition of 80% of market,
got it,
right?
Yep.
If that's the direction that they're sending, we need a direction from CMCH saying, no, use the city's bylaw. Use the income-based definition that the residents of Toronto want. That's it.
I also
And
think-
Ishmael wants to say something real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, apologies. Before we jump into the definition question, from what you've said so far, the federal government funds it, but it funds it through the province and the city. Currently in place, are there no ways for those funds, based on TCHC staff in conversation with the different different levels? Could there not be a discussion to facilitate
Mhm.
those funds to come and leverage the revitalization that's happening now,
Mhm.
because like I know that the city of Toronto could make requests to say that here we're working on a project before it gets finalized. In order to bring in additional RGI units, we would need this much, and then the federal or the province would have to look at its existing portfolios and programs
That's
and
right.
see if there are possibilities. And if there are possibilities, then they would say, "Hey, we do have targets in place. This could work." If that's one pathway, just from the bureaucracy side, because you
Because
already
there's
have
so much.
because you already have
There
existing
is.
programs in place. I know that many times TCHC has said they're in conversation or starting a conversation. So is just a mere facilitation of conversations, or does there need to be movement from the minister's side?
I think it's a combination of both.
Mhm.
And if that's,
That's
the
what I
case,
think,
yeah,
I
and
do.
if that's the case, how could it look like? Because I'm ignorant of how these things happen. I know one time, for instance, we only see the results,
Mhm.
right? We don't see the machinery behind it, and you know the machinery behind it. So how could we facilitate to leverage this phases 4 and 5
Exactly.
to the best of our ability?
I mean, let me start. I mean, we can only proceed based on what's in front of us, right? You know, we have X amount of RGI units available, and that's what we have to go by. I cannot, you know, go beyond that legally. But again, as Marcy mentioned, you know, the province is also, you know, responsible for that as well, right? Even they may be funded by the federal government. And Kristen, you know, MPP is not, you know, in the government per se. So, you know, I think it's also important that, you know, you have conversations with the provincial minister of housing, right? To perhaps let him know
Yeah, that's exactly it.
how, you know, what
We've
you
already started.
yeah, so I mean, that engagement is important, but again, as a city, we're limited as to what we can do, right? I mean, yes, we advocate and, you know, we clearly state what we want and what our preferences are, but that's all we can do, right?
I just want to bring
So-
it back. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so you're right. I know that you're limited based on what you already have, and you can make requests. So then that means the bucket is almost passed to the provincial bureaucracy or the federal bureaucracy, and ministers could facilitate or could inquire as to what are the possibilities. So do we know what the possibilities are, or is that hidden? It's hidden from us. Is that hidden from your purview?
It's not about being hidden, but I think Chris makes a really good point. You gotta engage the province, right? And Kristen, for all the good work that they do, is not in government right now in this province, and it's important. I don't know how much engagement that you've had.
I'll
but-
explain that.
Yeah, but engaging with the housing minister is a serious point, because you need to be engaged with the people that are running things, right? And the government that's in charge right now, because that's who we'd engage with. That's what I'm saying to you, right? So you engage with them, all right, and that's who we would engage with, because that's where the money would go.
I just want to provide some context. So the Regent Park Tenants Association, which you folks met with prior to us,
Yes.
is a member of the coalition, right? And actually, we're working in synergy. And one of the things that, you know, they're working to secure is a meeting with Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
right? To start
Yes,
having
they
a
are.
conversation about the RGI units. I remember, you know, meeting with them to talk about, okay, this is great. We're trying to leverage that commitment from the province. And just as a quick summary for everyone, the way things work is that provincially, the cities are seen as creatures of the province. So the province usually funds all the municipalities and can actually prioritize what they build, like for example, housing in Toronto, right? But the federal government has such a critical role to play.
Of course.
And the federal government funds this initiatives. This initiatives, for example, like the Ontario Line, wouldn't have been possible without funding from our federal government,
That's right.
right? But look what the federal government did for the Ontario Line. They came up with agreements with the province on what sort of community benefits should roll out from those developments that happen across the Ontario
And that was
Line.
the federal
That's
and
the
provincial
federal.
together.
Exactly.
That's exactly, and that's what I mean.
Exactly.
And so absolutely willing to talk.
Yeah.
And to your point, right, but that's what it means. It means a partnership between the province and us but it has to be a partnership with those that are in government right now.
And
And
Marcy,
our member is not in government right now, and for all the work that they do and the great work they do, they're not. And so to engage provincially with the housing minister and that team is really important because that's who we engage with.
so I wanna make this specific ask, is we're gonna do our very best to make sure that the community is ready to engage the minister, through Regional Park Tenants Association,
Yes.
through our coalition, through other folks. What we're hoping that you could do, Marcy, is connect with Minister Ahmed Hussein. Say, listen, what can our federal government put forward to the province for phases 4 and 5 that we could get behind, right? We've heard from the community about the definition of affordable housing. They want it to be the city's definition of affordable housing, not any other definition that's based on market. Be very clear. We want an income-based one. And how do we move forward with the money that's required for phases 4 and 5 to deliver more RGI and this definition of affordable housing, so that we could deal with the housing crisis in a very real, meaningful way for the specifically to the folks in our community that are deeply impacted, right? So if we can do that, what we can do is we can line up that meeting with the minister. We can make sure that our counselor is also available, because our counselor is going to be one of our biggest advocates when it comes to this issue, and hopefully the provincial government will say, you know what, we're actually willing to put this amount of funding to make this happen, right? So can we? What do you think? Chris has some feedback.
And
I have a question.
Yeah.
But I also have a statement. Minister, it's almost 12:30. The bells are about to go off. So
Okay, that's okay, thank you, that's okay.
Just
The bells are ringing, I'm happy.
But I have a question for Councillor and the city staff. When there's city, because I'm also not well versed with things, Emily, you brought up some things that are interesting and things that I'm learning for the first time. So when there's these definitions in place, like I know you said there's the federal definition of what affordable housing,
Same
there's a
solutions.
city definition, so there's a city of Toronto definition. But does that mean each city then has their own definition and each municipality then has their own definition of what affordable housing looks like, or is that just city of Toronto that has their own? Because then that leads into even a bigger thing, because then how can federal government, or how can
Excellent
each
question.
thing
No, that's-
regulate, because then we have to go by each city's regulations,
Excellent
how do
question.
you roll that
So
program?
the market-based
Whether-
definitions is a very recent, it got changed because the city of Toronto passed OPA 558 because we all had this really serious conversation that no one should be paying more than 30% of their household income to pay for housing, right? If you look at the National Housing Strategy, it's based on income-based definition, not a market-based definition, right? So that was going to actually, if the challenge to OPA 558 was successful at the Ontario Land Tribunal, which basically we won in February, because all the developers withdrew their appeals. Now the city of Toronto can implement in full effect OPA 558, right? Because of that victory, the National Housing Strategy wasn't jeopardized. In fact, if they won, it have raised doubt about how do you implement
How
the
you
National
do it.
Housing Strategy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what we're saying right now is we're trying to actually make it a common standard, right? To be basically a definition of affordable housing. Specifically that we want it to be income-based, because the message that TCHC is getting is that CMCH's definition
Yeah.
is 80% of market.
Can Tyler add, because I know he's on this file, so.
Yeah, so also just to clarify, so the City of Toronto uses the average CMHC numbers to determine what the affordable definition is, and also average market rents and estimated 2021 household income. So
Yeah.
the city, to come up with our definition of what affordable rent is for each unit type, uses federal data. Like,
Mhm.
we don't
Okay.
create our own
Yeah.
data out of
No,
that.
I
We use
saw.
federal data, but we have we have our specific, instead of
Because
what Waleed
there's-
is saying in terms of 80% AMR, which is what most people
Yeah.
outside of the city define as affordable, the city of Toronto has taken an even
Yeah.
greater
Makes
approach to
sense.
say, actually, no, it's lower.
Okay.
I remember the city staff answered the question by saying that the city of Toronto uses multiple definitions depending on what they call the sector or which unit you're in. So I'm not sure, even though that definition was recently upheld, I don't know to what extent that's been rolled out across all of your portfolios.
I mean, I think it's also that there's clear, definite, like, so there's RGI, then there's affordable housing, and affordable housing is not based on income. It's based on the average incomes in Toronto, but not based on your income or your average income. So that's the differences, and that's where that's where it begins to get murky. Now, one question I will be bringing back, because it is actually a good one, and I remember TCHC's response.
Yeah.
So I want to know actually why they're not using OPA 558, because it doesn't make sense if our own corporation is not using our
Exactly.
definition of affordable
Yeah, you
housing.
get each
So
other, 100%.
we'll bring
Yes.
that back.
Okay, so I think you're missing one key point. Living in housing and the rent that it goes up
Mhm.
when your income goes higher.
Yeah.
But when your income goes lower, you have to wait a whole year
Mhm.
to do that income. How are you paying rent when your income is low? Like I went through that.
A lot of people go
My
through that.
rent, I know, but I'm speaking as
Yeah.
my experience.
Yeah.
My rent was higher than my income.
Yeah.
I was pinching from everywhere, and this is a problem. And then when I went to TCAC, they say the city made that change.
Mhm.
There has to be a way of doing that for people. I really had to, I don't know, others don't have that way of me, of reaching to who I need to reach, but it's hard when you can't pay, and then when you don't pay rent,
And you arrears.
you're arrears, and then you get evicted.
Yeah.
So that's a huge problem.
We'll take a look. You know, TCAC always give it back to the city, right? When they make their own decisions sometimes. And I've experienced that in the short time I've been here.
Yeah.
But Tyler will take that back and go to
Thank you, Councilor Moise. So for the remainder, we've got about 10 more minutes. This is very critical. This is about space. So I think we're all on the same page of what we're gonna do next. We've made our case about the definition of affordable housing. We've offered to connect with the provincial government to try to make that meeting happen. But we need our minister's leadership and advocacy to work with our councillor to make sure that, we come to some sort of closure on especially the policy level, what the definition of affordable housing is, and whether it's gonna be funding from the federal government that's gonna be committed to phases 1 and 5. This is,
Malik, actually, if I could say something.
Yes.
And I told this to the Regent Park Tennis Association as well, to get a meeting with Minister Hussein, even though we work for the same government, we can't guarantee any meeting with them. So what will happen is you'll have to send me a formal letter
Mhm.
explaining what you would like to discuss with him, any like additional documents just for him to get
Go
more
through.
information on
Okay.
phase 4, phase 5. We can send it to
Absolutely.
them with the recommendation of the minister.
And that's exactly what I will do.
But
Okay?
then we can't
So-
guarantee that meeting, that's up to his team.
no,
But
And
we'll
you
have my
won't.
recommendation.
Thank you so much for being clear. You're always
Mhm.
working to
Yeah, no.
set expectations. I love
Yeah.
that about you.
Yeah.
Also, one last thing, I know that, you want Minister to speak to Minister Hussein about phase 4, phase 5.
Yeah.
The thing about that is because this is a very specific project to a neighborhood and he's a minister, all of his funding is meant for all of Canada.
Mhm.
I was gonna.
And the other part is, and
Provincially.
yes, right? And let's be clear too, Minister Hussein comes from this area.
Yeah.
Right? So from an ethical standpoint, right?
Mhm.
So, and it's true, when you're dealing with ministerial stuff, this is across the country.
Mhm.
So both of us work, I mean, these are my communities, but he comes from this community. And if there is any whiff of preferential treatment or anything like that, then those are ethical violations that are,
I get your
right?
point. Yeah.
Right? So I'm just saying, he's the housing minister, yes? He's a housing minister that comes from Regent Park,
I get
right?
it.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah,
To be
that's
fair,
why-
provincially is the same thing
And
too.
provincially, it's the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why,
Right? Provincially, it's the same thing. Kristen, right, comes, so it's,
yeah, so
right?
that's why it's really important to let the bureaucracy do the work. So that's why it's important for Toronto Community Housing staff, while they're in their planning phase of saying what is possible for this last phases, can we add additional RGI units?
Mhm.
So that's the
Mhm.
first question. If we could, what is it that we need to get? What is it that we need to do? How are we supposed to resource it? And the question is to sort of, I don't know, do a search around existing programs, federal
Funding
programs or provincial programs that could facilitate it. If there are none, there's none. But if there are some, then that would be a correspondence between TCSC staff to the right appropriate provincial or federal division to say, hey, we have a housing that's about to finish, a city, in this neighborhood. There's existing programs to fund it. Could we facilitate it? Are we in the same timeline requirements those conversations need to happen at the bureaucratic level to see what the possibilities are. If it requires sort of a ministerial intervention, then it becomes sort of a politicized sort of something, which is quite sort of challenging. That's why it has to be the bureaucrats need to figure out, right, what the possibilities are, if there are existing programs. Now, once they've exhausted that and they sort of say, well, within the timelines or requirements, it's not possible, then we can say, then we can have a conversation with the political side. Why isn't it possible? Couldn't you create exceptions?
Yeah.
Those could be conversations about with the minister, because then we're asking for a ministerial intervention as opposed to letting the existing practices happen, right? So that's why my question is with TCSE staff, have they began those conversations and made those requests or searched for those programs? Because if they haven't done it, they need to do that. And once they inform you, we've looked into existing programs, they don't work, then we can take our stuff to the political dimension.
It's about transparency, Minister, right? Like the thing is,
Does that make
we
sense?
want to know
Yeah.
what funding, what funding commitments have been made for phases 4 and 5, because the revite is not just phases 1; it's phases 1 to 5, and
Yeah,
the
and
federal
we
government
always
has been
see,
funding it from phases
interesting
1.
enough, with Daniels, we always see interesting interventions come up. Like for instance, with the nonprofit, housing that was built for mothers,
Yeah.
right? That must have taken a conversation at the bureaucratic level of what's available. So throughout the phases, we've seen many interesting things come up from the federal, provincial, but it was facilitated through conversations with staff. And later on, we saw, oh, we didn't even knew this was baking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question would be, what other things could be baked within your existing programs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think we're gonna move on to the next item because this is very important. So I sent a space needs report. I think people have seen this report. There's about 29 organizations, grassroots organizations that submitted space needs for indoor and outdoor space. And I provided some context in the beginning of this meeting saying that those findings were included in the submission by Tridel and TCH as part of the rezoning application. And if you look at it, you know, the Black Talent Initiative, Acorn Arts, like all these amazing organizations that we know right now operating in Regent Park, but there are new ones that we find out about at the community building working group of the SDP every other month, right? And we're trying to actually map out who these new organizations are. Now, when we did this intentionally because we knew that if we didn't do a study of our space needs now, we will lose the golden opportunity to inform how space is going to be not just managed but built, specifically community space needs, right? Because what we've learned from phases 1 to 3 is there's an issue of governance, where, for example, you know, certain buildings will close at 5 o'clock and there won't be operations after 5 o'clock, right? So we wanted to make sure that we address that as well. So, what are the findings of the report? Total outdoor space needs was about 37,625 square feet. Total indoor space needs was 107,813 square feet.
And this is just Regent Park.
This is just Regent Park. This is for the organizations operating in Regent Park.
Yeah, no,
So-
yeah, 'cause I'm thinking of St. Jamestown right now.
Exactly.
No, actually.
107,000. So guess what we're trying to propose? We're trying to propose not community governed space in different parts of the Revite. We want a central space that's community governed, and we've put forward a model that we know works, right? The one that is used at the 519, which is the AOCC, and I think that model works because there is a level of transparency and accountability when it comes to like who governs the space, but also there's investment by the city, right? And I think when it comes to critical infrastructure like community spaces, it's important to have those relationships or have a separate model by which the community governs the space, because that's, I think, where we got a majority of support for, right? So the question that we have for Minister Marcy Ian is, we've seen that level of investment from our federal government when it comes to community spaces. Daniel Spectrum being a good example, right? could we look into phases 4 and 5 and consider investments that could go into a centrally, a central space, community space, that's community governed, right? And I think that will help us address the space needs that we've just referred to in the report. You know, there's about 29 organizations that spent hours filling out a survey, right? So want to get a response.
So sorry.
No worries, it's okay. Yeah, so what we're hoping to do is just get some feedback on whether there is capital infrastructure, or funding for capital infrastructure that's available for us to like look into. Is there ways we can start planning for that now in coordination with our approval process related to rezoning to see if the federal government could pitch in some funds?
And that will lead, I will take back, okay, and noted.
But also, in phases 4 and 5,
Yes.
using section 37 funds,
Okay.
rather than asking for money, we're asking for space. And my office, along with city staff, has secured 35,000 plus square feet of space in
Okay.
phases 4 and 5.
Okay.
How that's going to be structured, I'm still figuring that out. I haven't made any decisions on that. I'm just trying to figure out my options.
Okay.
So, time will tell.
Yeah, and
Michael, one
we're,
second.
we're hoping that the spaces are community governed, so that's the conversations that we've had with city staff is how would we go about doing this. We'll be able to come back, so to be clear, we've already told TCHC to their
CEO?
to their, I guess, chagrin or demise, like they don't really like it, but they will not be owning the spaces. We've already made that clear to them. The challenge that we'll have, Minister, is capital funding to furnish the spaces. So
Got it.
the spaces are secured, but to furnish the spaces, that is still to be determined.
And it's 35,000 square feet.
Yeah,
Well, it's
in
actually
total
more than
across
that,
the.
but yeah.
Okay, Michael, you can speak next, and then I have a question. Go ahead, Michael.
So, I mean, based on some of the things which were just mentioned and a few other things I've heard in meetings, I have been asked what is the financial proposal, and I have heard a number of things that can suggest what that might be. I want to confirm some of them. Sometimes it's hard to just go off of things that are said in meetings, but I will be putting forward a written proposal for what the financial model would look like.
Okay, so I think that's one important point, Michael. We're thinking about the long-term operations of the facility, Minister, right? Like you talked about furnishings, which is great. You know, we need some furniture, we need some places to stay or sit on, but what is gonna be more important is the gas, like the just paying for basic cost operations of the building. And the reason why we recommended the AOCC model is because that's a sustainable model that we've seen at various other community centers across the city of Toronto. Yeah.
So that's been sort of stopped. What would it take to revive that for Regent Park?
But we do have the opportunity to possibly, like use the community benefit in the rezoning for the capital and some of the money from the community benefit in the,
Only if the community says so.
other, the 26 million
Exactly.
portion of that for the operating cost for a certain number of years. So there are ways to make this
There are ways, Michael.
financially viable.
Yeah, there are ways, Michael, but that still needs to be validated by the community. But let's go back to this
Yeah,
question.
what would it, because I know that council stopped that model
AOCC.
some time ago, and if there's a request here to resurrect that, what would it take?
No. That's a valid question. I'd have to examine that.
So I also just want to say, like, I think there's a misconception perhaps in Regent Park about how an AOCC works. AOCC is Association of Community Centers. There's only 10 of them that exist in the city of Toronto, and they receive very base funding from the city, and then they're expected to fundraise the rest. So the 519, for example, is an AOCC, but they have to fundraise about 60 to 70% of their funding in order to operate. So, just to be clear, like an AOC doesn't necessarily mean, oh, we're good,
We're funded. Yeah.
The board does a lot of work to fundraise a majority of their pieces. The city takes care of the kind of capital expenses for the 519, as an example.
Yeah, and just last week we were at their major fundraiser.
I was just about to say,
Yeah,
was it-
for
right?
that,
So,
and it's a struggle here. I mean, another model too is St. Lawrence Market, for example. Right, that property is owned by the city, but it has vendors within it, right, and it helps fund itself. I mean, there are various models, that we are looking at, and based on best practices that will make the spaces, successful. That's what I'm looking at.
I know you've mentioned land trust, and a few people have mentioned concerns around land trust, around monopoly of people, competition for ownership and governance of those land trusts. Could you say a little bit more about what you're thinking in regards?
Well, I mean, again, this is why I just mentioned the St. Lawrence Market as a hybrid option, right? Again, I'm not saying it has to be one or the other, but I'm just thinking that rather than having TCAC, run the 35,000 plus square feet, clearly I believe it hasn't worked well in phases 1, 2, and 3. But there are lessons learned from that. I want the space to belong to the community. I want a board, an independent board that members of the community is on,
Exactly.
and determines perhaps how it functions. Perhaps who comes into certain spaces. For example, the Summit Resort Center is one of those places that could actually be leased to, be a 25 or 50-year lease, and pay for the space. So the money goes back into land trust, right? So it's self-sustaining, right? I don't want to run it. I don't think the city should run it. I don't think TCAC should run it. So this is why I'm trying to think outside the box with input from the community eventually. But again, you remember I've only been here for 5 months, so I'm just really trying to figure things out. But yes.
I think we're gonna end the meeting because I know Mars has to go. But I just wanna say thanks to everyone that attended our meeting, folks online and in person. This is a great start to the conversation. I think we need to have a follow-up meeting for sure, just to make sure that, those little pieces that we just talked about are followed up upon. I know Ishmael wanted to say something real quick.
No, just next steps, because it was unclear to me. I think we can do the sort of engaging the minister of the province side, but I just wanted to get a confirmation that the sort of civil bureaucratic elements have been exhausted, so that conversations between city staff and other levels, those are done and done, because then we can sort of get the political side
Exactly.
started, but only if that has been exhausted. Is there a way to confirm that?
Yeah, Yusuf will email TCHC and confirm that.
and let
Well, yeah.
her.
Sorry, the last thing that we wanted to say, I didn't want to forget this, is that we heard very explicitly from a lot of folks during the community consultation that we just had online, that people wanted an in-person consultation. There was a lot of access-related questions. You didn't even ask your question. There was some Regent Park residents that messaged me later on. It's like, how do I even speak now? How do I
People are
communicate?
feeling left out.
People are getting left out.
People
exactly.
are feeling left out.
Exactly,
In a lot of this.
Minister. And I think it's important for us to have that in-person consultation. I so remember our counselor saying at the meeting that that's a possibility that we could look into. So if there's a meeting with, we're supposed to be meeting today actually, it's RPNA. This is what we're mainly going to be talking about as a neighborhood association, is how do we make that in-person meeting happen? And we discussed it actually internally. We have the capacity to hold an in-person meeting, right? We could work with Regent Park Focus to make sure it's also, recorded and made much more accessible on YouTube. But we want to work with you, Councilor Moise, in making this happen. So the office from the neighborhood association to work with the councilor on an in-person meeting.
Yeah, and for sure. Equity of access is important as well. I mean, this is why I like the hybrid model. Everyone can meet in person.
Yeah.
But also when we do meet in person, I would like to hear from everybody.
That's what I was just
Not-
about to
not just,
say.
you know, the majority or, you know,
Yeah,
the
I was just
loudest
about to
voices
say
around.
that.
Yeah.
So again, and even though the
100%.
in-person setups I actually don't like because, you know, there's one in front of the room and everybody else is sitting and paying attention. I prefer round tables rather than
Exactly.
squares, quite frankly. But
No.
no.
No,
But,
no, set it up like that.
You can set it up as a round table.
Yeah, so again, you know, I'm saying yes, but, you know, with conditions.
100%. Okay, so you folks heard it online, so we'll work together with some conditions. Marlene's shaking her head enthusiastically, I can see. Thank you, David. Thank you for joining us. It's been a great meeting, and
Are
we're
you
done.
okay today? You seem like you're.
Yeah, so here's the thing, listen, I just wanna thank everybody, everybody for coming. But the overwhelming theme, as we is it's more voices,
Exactly.
right? There are legacy, tenants in Regent Park
Huge.
who need to be heard with regards to all of this.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that that's the case.
Exactly.
That moving forward, that everybody has a voice with regards to this, right? So we, from a government perspective and various levels, we can chat and everything, but I need to make sure, we need to make sure that everybody's heard here.
So,
Exactly.
one of the challenges, I mean, we have this private market going on here.
Yes.
We don't know who's living in these units. Majority of them are not owners, they're renters. And a lot of them are on your RGI list, are looking for affordable housing.
Exactly.
And, you know, and they're like invisible.
But
There's no
Deanie, this is
needs
what I mean,
assessment.
this is what I mean, right? We need to, like, my feeling is that we're having, you know, a fulsome conversation with the voices that need to be at this
Included,
table
100%.
and included that aren't,
100%.
and that's important.
Yeah. Make that happen. Thank you
And
so
also
much.
too, like, you know, I just find that even in Regent Park, there are many different groups
Yes.
speaking in silos.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have to
Bring
think
together.
So,
Excellent.
okay, thank you so much,
Thank you
Marcy.
so
Thank you
long,
so
everybody.
It's so good to see you.
Always nice to see you.
Okay, I'm running to vote, so good to see you. Thank God for virtual voting. Guys, please, okay, on the way, like, what are we doing with all of this? Take all the things, okay? Take all the things. You heard her. Take all the things.
Thank you so much. Doing great. I'm impressed.
That has been the constant refrain.
I met your daughter for a brief second.
She had so much fun, she's going to all the vendors.
I
She's
know.
like, "I want this, we got something for my mom from Mother's Day."
That's
So
amazing.
yummy.
That's amazing.
Not young, right?
Okay, bye. Take care. Have a vote.
Thank
Have a
you,
vote.
very specific.